Okay, so after watching my lesson, what did you like about it?
Um, okay, let me read what I wrote down. So the lesson was well planned and it was executed very well by you. The students were engaged and they seemed to really enjoy the story that you presented. You asked really good questions that were preparing them for the next activity, which they didn't know they had to do. So, like, you would just ask them what was at a step, and it was encouraging to see the students answering back and they were correct. And the reason it's encouraging is because this is like your informal assessment. So by them answering your question correctly tells you that your lesson is going as you had planned and they're learning what your objective was from the beginning. Um, I also like seeing the students come up to the board and present their answers to their peers. That puts the learning back for the students, and that's part of like our goal is that it's they are learning all of our instruction that we do as teachers. It has to fall back on the students. It has to be student driven, and you're just guiding them to where they need to be. So it was really encouraging. It was really nice to see that the students were coming up to the board. They were presenting their answers to their peers, and then they were going through and saying like, what could I have changed? What could have been different? So it was nice to see that feedback from the students to the students versus you directly giving them all the feedback. Um, yeah, so those were the things that I liked.
Okay, what are some things that you feel that I need to improve on?
Okay, so let me go back to what I wrote. The only thing that I would have done differently, and it's probably a little bit biased because I do primarily work with SPED students, so I have to look at it through a SPED lens. Um, is that I would have had the problem and the steps to the solution and the solution on sentence strips and put them in a pocket chart. And so as we're reading and as they're answering, I could have flipped them and they would have used that as a visual guide. And then right before they wrote them themselves, I would have turned that whole board around so they couldn't see the answers. And
Mm-hmm.
they could have just recalled that information. So again, this feedback is probably like slightly biased because I mostly work with SPED students. Other than that, your lesson, I wouldn't have done anything differently.
Okay, what about the student that I was working with that I was helping to transcribe some of the work for him? Would you have done the same thing or would you have done something different?
I would have done the same thing because he's a student on an IEP, and so you have to look at it differently. So the fact that he was verbally telling you the answers tells you that he understands, he's comprehending the lesson. Um, the fact that he can't get his thoughts on paper,
Mm-hmm.
that's just part of the disability, and so you're accommodating by verbally one-on-one working with him and getting those answers. And as long as he's giving you those answers for now, that's okay because that's written in the IEP.
Now,
Uh,
is there any other activities that you would do to help support him along the way to kind of get him to make more academic strides on his own? Or would you just continue to do the transcribing with the student throughout the school year?
I would continue with the transcribing if I noticed that um, when we came back from winter break, he still had those skills, then I would probably pull back a little bit and maybe only transcribe like one answer versus all of them or two or three. Because we have to also remember that students on an IEP regress. So when we
Mm-hmm.
come back from winter break, if they're still doing what we were doing prior to winter break, then that's when I would kind of step back and think like, okay, they maintain that skill. How can I help them? Maybe I only transcribe the first sentence or the first answer, and then they have to do the rest by themselves.
Okay. Is there any other recommendations that you would consider This is my first year teaching first grade. Any recommendations and activities that I can do along the lines of reading comprehension and checking for understanding?
No, I think that what you're doing right now is appropriate for the grade level that you have. I think that just asking those questions out loud and getting that feedback from the students gives you that informal data that you need to plan your lessons and then moving forward with your lessons. So if you were asking these questions and they weren't answering them correctly, then that would tell you, like, maybe I need to stop, slow down. We can't do the graphic organizer yet. We just need to focus just on the problem, identifying the problem, and not yet move on to steps to problem and solution. I think that for the grade level that you have, you're doing a great job with just doing those informal assessments and then taking that data to plan your instruction for the future.
Okay, now as far as rigor, did you feel that those questions were challenging enough but not overly challenging? Because we were kind of just doing like little formative or just like checking for understanding. Did you feel that those questions were too rigorous, or were they appropriate? Should I have been a little more challenging with my question choices, or what were your thoughts on that?
I think your questions were right on. The book wasn't very challenging, so it doesn't really lend itself for very rigorous questions. So I think that as far as like with the curriculum, with the material that you have been given, you did a great job with your questions. I think they were just on point with what you were trying to accomplish.
Okay. As far as professional feedback, what do you think I could have done to kind of drive this lesson home with my students?
Drive this lesson home with your students.
Just to kind of ensure that they understood it, and actually, what would have been some next steps just in case students did not understand what we were trying to do?
As a whole group, because I if this were my lesson, next steps would be I would identify which students were having a hard time with this lesson,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would pull them back for small group.
Okay.
And I would check to see at what point those students got lost. Was it because they couldn't identify the problem? Okay, is it because they don't understand the problem of a story? Is it that's where we go in and we really try to target like exactly at what point I lost that student, and let's plan instruction around that.
Okay. And would your next steps be like small group? Would you teach a whole class just to review? What would you do differently as far as the next step?
I would probably present I would probably do another whole group lesson with a different story.
Okay.
And
You would just use the same skills in that lesson, basically.
yes, yes. So what I would do is I would say, think back to Whistles for Willie. When did we identify the problem? What were the steps? What were the solution? What was the solution? I'm sorry. That's something that I've done in the past before. I would give them the same graphic organizer, so they're using the same tools with a different story.
Mm-hmm.
And that again is another another informal assessment that I would use
Okay.
to plan my instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So if they really grasp if they really understood the concept, they will now be able to apply this to a different story and a different story and a different story. And if I see that they are doing it, then that tells me, okay, they got this concept, let's move on. If
Okay.
they didn't, then I need to go back and reteach the lesson, because then they're just doing it from memory because of Whistles for Willie.
Mm-hmm. So they're just going with the flow and not really comprehending the story, right?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else you think I should change on my lesson or do differently next time I teach something like this?
No, I think it was good. I liked seeing that you had the anchor chart available for the students,
Mm-hmm.
and that was something that they could refer back to. Um, it's appropriate for the grade level. I
Mm-hmm.
think that if you were teaching a higher grade level, they wouldn't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was nice to see that you had it up and it wasn't all from memory. So
Okay.
you had the anchor chart. You were also asking them questions from memory. So it was kind of like you had the best of both worlds.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your feedback. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.